You've spent most of your life believing that who you are is fixed, that your personality, reactions, habits, limits, and emotional tendencies are simply you, when in reality they are learned, practiced, and reinforced patterns that once served a purpose but were never meant to define your future. And the moment you realize this is the moment you step out of unconscious living and into deliberate creation, because awareness is the first act of freedom. And without awareness, every thought you think feels like truth, every emotion you feel feels justified, and every reaction you have feels inevitable. But none of that is who you are. It is merely what you have rehearsed. Repetition creates familiarity, familiarity creates identity, and identity quietly shapes destiny while you're busy blaming circumstances, people, timing, or luck. Yet the truth is simpler and more confronting. Your life is a mirror of your internal state, and it always has been, because every day you wake up and think the same thoughts, feel the same emotions, and run the same mental programs. You are voting for the same future, not consciously, but biologically, neurologically, emotionally, and energetically. And biology does not respond to desire, it responds to consistency. So if you want to understand why change has felt so difficult, it's not because you lack willpower, intelligence, or potential. It's because your body has been trained to live in the past while your mind dreams of the future. And the body always wins when there is incoherence, because the body is the subconscious mind, and the subconscious mind runs the majority of your life silently, efficiently, and without asking your permission. From the moment you were young, you were conditioned to associate certain events with certain emotional responses, and over time, those responses hardened into reflexes. Reflexes hardened into personality traits, and personality traits hardened into identity, and now that identity feels so familiar that questioning it feels like a threat, even when that identity is rooted in stress, self-doubt, scarcity, or fear, because the nervous system values predictability over happiness, familiarity over freedom, and survival over growth, which is why you can logically want change while emotionally resisting it, because the unknown represents loss of control to a system designed to protect you from uncertainty, and yet the very uncertainty you avoid is the doorway to every version of yourself you've never met. But to walk through that doorway, you must be willing to observe yourself without judgment, because judgment locks patterns in place while observation dissolves them, and most people never truly observe themselves. They live inside their thoughts instead of witnessing them. They drown in their emotions instead of understanding them, and as a result, they confuse their experiences with their identity, saying, I am anxious, I am broken, I am unlucky, when the truth is I am experiencing anxiety, I am carrying old emotional memory, I am replaying conditioned expectations, and that subtle shift in language is not semantic, it is structural. Because the moment you separate who you are from what you experience, you create space. And space is where change becomes possible. Think about how often your day is governed by unconscious reactions. How quickly you check your phone, how automatically you respond to stress, how predictably you fall into the same emotional states when faced with the same triggers, and understand that none of this is a personal failure. It is a biological success. Your brain has simply become very good at predicting the familiar, because prediction conserves energy, and energy efficiency is survival, so the brain prefers the known even when the known is painful, because pain you can predict feels safer than possibility you cannot control. And yet this same predictive machinery is also what allows you to change, because neuroplasticity does not disappear with age. It disappears with unconsciousness. And as long as you are alive and aware, your brain is capable of reorganizing itself in response to new experiences, new thoughts, and new emotional states. But here is the key most people miss. You do not change by waiting for new experiences. You change by generating new internal states first, because waiting for the world to change before you change keeps you trapped in reaction. And reaction is the language of the past. Every emotional reaction you've ever had has left a chemical imprint in your body, and repeated emotional states condition the body to expect certain experiences, which means if you live in stress, your body becomes addicted to stress chemistry. If you live in fear, it becomes familiar with fear. If you live in frustration, it becomes your baseline. And addiction does not require pleasure. It only requires repetition. So when you attempt to step into calm, clarity, or confidence, the body rebels, not because those states are wrong, but because they are unfamiliar. And unfamiliar feels unsafe to a system trained in survival, which is why change often feels uncomfortable before it feels liberating, because you are literally asking your body to release its attachment to the known self. And the known self, no matter how limiting, feels like home. This is why intellectual understanding alone never creates transformation. You can read the books, watch the videos, attend the seminars, and still live the same life. Because information does not rewire identity, Experience does, and experience begins internally with conscious choice, sustained attention, and emotional intention. And the first conscious choice is this: to stop living as the automatic expression of your past and start living as the intentional rehearsal of your future. And that rehearsal begins not with action, but with awareness, because you cannot change what you are not aware of. And awareness requires presence, and presence requires you to slow down enough to notice how often you leave the present moment to revisit the past or rehearse the future in ways that reinforce fear, lack, and limitation. Notice how quickly your mind drifts to problems that haven't happened yet, conversations that already ended, regrets you can't change, and expectations rooted in old experiences. And recognize that every time you do this, your body responds as if those events are real, because the body does not know the difference between an actual experience and one vividly imagined with emotion. So when you relive stress, your body releases stress hormones. When you rehearse fear, your body prepares for danger. And when you anticipate lack, your body braces for survival. And over time, this becomes your physiological baseline, which means even in moments of peace, your system doesn't know how to rest because it has been trained to stay alert, vigilant, and reactive. And this is not your fault. It is conditioning, but it is your responsibility to interrupt it, because no one else can feel your thoughts for you. No one else can choose your internal state, and no one else can practice presence on your behalf. The moment you decide to observe your thoughts instead of obeying them, to feel your emotions without becoming them, to pause before reacting, you initiate a biological rebellion against the past. And rebellion is not force, it is consistency. It is choosing awareness again and again until awareness becomes the new habit, and habits shape identity, and identity shapes destiny. So when you practice presence, you are not doing nothing, you are doing the most powerful thing possible. You are stepping out of time, because the past only exists in memory, the future only exists in imagination, and the present moment is the only place where change can occur, because this is where choice lives. And choice is the birthplace of freedom. As you continue this work, you will begin to notice how often your mind seeks distraction, urgency, stimulation, anything to avoid stillness, because stillness dissolves illusion. And illusion is what keeps the old self alive. But in stillness, you can hear the subtle patterns, the repeated narratives, the emotional loops, and once seen clearly, they begin to lose their power, because what is conscious can no longer run unconsciously. And this is the beginning of mastery, not mastery over the world, but mastery over yourself. And self-mastery is the foundation of every meaningful transformation, because without it, success amplifies stress, relationships magnify insecurity, and achievement never satisfies. But with it, even the smallest moments carry depth, clarity, and alignment. This is the awakening. The moment you realize that you are not here to fix your life, but to outgrow the version of you that keeps recreating it, and that outgrowing does not happen overnight. It happens moment by moment, choice by choice, breath by breath. As you repeatedly return to awareness, presence, and intention, and with every return you loosen the grip of the past, and with every loosening you create space for the future to emerge, not as a distant hope, but as a lived internal reality. And that is where this journey truly begins. At some point, on this journey of awakening, awareness alone will no longer feel comfortable, because awareness reveals something confronting, that you have not just been thinking certain thoughts or feeling certain emotions, you have been chemically conditioned to them. And the moment you see that clearly, you begin to understand why change has felt like swimming upstream, because you are not just changing habits, you are challenging an addiction. And addiction is not limited to substances. Addiction is any emotional or chemical state the body has learned to rely on for identity, familiarity, or control. And most people are unknowingly addicted to stress, urgency, struggle, worry, judgment, and even self-criticism, because those states have been rehearsed so often that the body no longer knows who it is without them. And when the body does not know, it panics, and that panic shows up as resistance, distraction, impatience, and doubt right at the moment you are doing the work that could free you. Stress, in particular, has become one of the most socially accepted addictions, even rewarded, because stress feels productive, important, and necessary in a world that equates busyness with worth. But biologically, stress is a state of emergency, and when you live in emergency long enough, the body forgets how to heal, repair, and create, because all of its resources are diverted towards survival, and survival is not a state where growth occurs. It is a state where potential is postponed. And if you look honestly at your life, you will see how often you operate from this survival chemistry, how quickly your heart rate rises, how shallow your breathing becomes, how easily your mind jumps to worst-case scenarios, and understand that none of this is random. It is conditioned, rehearsed, and reinforced by repetition, and repetition is what wires the nervous system. Every time you react emotionally to the same trigger in the same way, you strengthen a neural circuit, and that circuit makes it easier to react the same way next time, until eventually the reaction happens faster than conscious choice, and at that point you believe this is just how I am, when in reality this is simply the result of practiced neurobiology, and what has been practiced can be unpracticed, but only if you are willing to sit with the discomfort of withdrawal, because when you stop feeding an emotional addiction, the body protests just like it would with any chemical dependency, and that protest shows up as restlessness, boredom, anxiety, fatigue, or the sudden urge to return to old patterns, not because those patterns are good for you, but because they are familiar. And familiarity feels like safety to a nervous system trained in the past. This is where most people are in back because they misinterpret discomfort as failure, but discomfort is actually confirmation that change is happening, because if nothing were changing, the body would feel perfectly at home, and growth never feels like home to the old self. It feels like loss of control, loss of identity, and loss of predictability, and the ego equates loss with danger, even when what is being lost is pain, limitation, and self-sabotage. So the ego will do everything it can to pull you back into the known. It will justify reactions, rationalize impatience, and convince you that now is not the right time, that you need more information, more motivation, more certainty, when what you actually need is more presence, because presence is what allows you to sit in the fire without running, and the fire is what burns away the dependency on the old self. When you remain present in the moment of emotional discomfort without reacting, suppressing, or distracting, you are doing something profoundly transformative. You are teaching your body that it can survive without the old chemical state. And this teaching does not happen through words. It happens through experience, and experience is the language of the nervous system. So every time you choose to breathe instead of react, to observe instead of judge, to soften instead of tense, you are sending a new signal to your body, and new signals create new chemistry, and new chemistry creates new identity. But this process requires patience, because the body learns through repetition, not insight, and the repetition must be consistent enough to override years of conditioning. Understand this deeply. You do not break an emotional addiction by force. Force only creates resistance. You break it through gentleness, awareness, and consistency. Because when you fight yourself, you reinforce the idea that something is wrong, and that judgment feeds stress chemistry, which keeps the addiction alive. But when you meet yourself with compassion and curiosity, you create safety. And safety is what allows the nervous system to reorganize, because healing does not occur in threat, it occurs in trust. And trust begins internally, when you stop punishing yourself for being human and start guiding yourself toward coherence. As you practice this work, you may notice moments where the old emotions rise without an external cause, sudden waves of sadness, irritation, or anxiety that seem disconnected from your present circumstances. And this is not regression, it is release. Your body is letting go of stored emotional energy that was never fully processed. Because in the past, you survived by moving on quickly, staying busy, or numbing, but now you are creating space, and space allows what was suppressed to surface, not to overwhelm you, but to exit. And if you can stay present during these moments, breathing, observing, allowing, without attaching a story, the energy completes its cycle and dissolves. And with each dissolution, you feel lighter, clearer, more grounded, because you are no longer carrying emotional memory as identity. This is the recalibration of the nervous system, the shift from chronic fight or flight into regulation. And regulation is not passivity, it is power, because a regulated system can respond instead of react, create instead of defend, and choose instead of repeat. And from this state, you begin to experience moments of inner stillness that feel unfamiliar at first, almost empty, because the drama of the past is no longer filling the space. And in that emptiness, the ego may panic, seeking stimulation, conflict, or urgency to reassert itself. But if you stay, if you resist the urge to fill the space, you will discover something extraordinary. Beneath the noise of survival is a deep well of clarity, intuition, energy that was always there, waiting for the chaos to quiet. In this stillness, you begin to recognize how much energy was being wasted on unnecessary tension, rumination, and emotional labor. And as that energy returns to you, you feel more present, more alive, more capable, not because the world has changed, but because your relationship to it has. And this is where empowerment truly begins, not in controlling circumstances, but in mastering your internal state. Because when your internal state is coherent, your perception sharpens, your decisions improve, and your actions become aligned with intention rather than reaction. Breaking the emotional addiction also reveals how much of your identity was built around struggle, how often you defined yourself by what you were fighting, fixing, or enduring. And when that struggle dissolves, you may feel temporarily unanchored, as if you don't know who you are without the problem. And this is a sacred pause, a moment of redefinition, because you are no longer the person who survives life. You are becoming the person who participates in it consciously, and participation requires presence, curiosity, and openness, qualities that cannot coexist with chronic stress, because stress narrows focus while creation expands it. As you continue, you will notice that external triggers lose their charge. Situations that once hijacked your emotions now feel manageable, even neutral. And this is not because you are disconnected, but because you are integrated. You are no longer outsourcing your inner state to outer conditions. And that independence is freedom, because when you are no longer controlled by emotional reflexes, you gain access to choice. And choice is the foundation of a new future, because every choice you make from coherence instead of survival carries a different energy. And energy is what organizes outcomes. This is the work beneath the work, the invisible training that precedes visible change. And without it, success is fragile, because it rests on a nervous system still addicted to stress. But with it, change becomes sustainable, because it is rooted in regulation, awareness, and self-trust. And as this foundation stabilizes, you are ready for the next phase. Not just breaking free from the past, but actively rehearsing the future, not as wishful thinking, but as embodied experience. Because once the body is no longer addicted to the old self, it becomes available to learn a new one.